Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. So this will be the second show for the week. I did a weekend review on Sunday, which I'm going to try. We'll see how it goes. I kind of want to do it on Sunday all the time, just because the numbers come out Sunday morning. Sure, they're just estimates, but they're pretty darn close. And that gives me enough time to sort of think about another show for the midweek and talk about sort of previewing what's coming out of the box office this upcoming weekend. Technically, which starts tomorrow. It's Wednesday night right now. Thursday previews start tomorrow night. So what I'm going to do this episode is we'll talk about what's coming out. Maybe I'll make some predictions here, see what other people are saying. And I might talk about an article or two that I read on Variety. And there's another good one on Hollywood Reporter about it that I might mention or talk about. But I think to get started, let's just go through what's coming out this week. So the first I guess the biggest opening this weekend is going to be American Made. This is a crime thriller, I guess you'd call it. That's what Box Office Mojo puts it as. It's Tom Cruise. If you saw the trailer, you're going to think, what? It looks like Narcos. Essentially, it's about a drug runner down in South America somewhere. That's what I gleaned from the trailer. I was like, this just looks just like Narcos. Like, why are they doing this movie? But apparently it's not terrible. Right now it's sitting at 88% Rotten Tomatoes. That's with about 78 reviews. So that's not bad. It's certainly not bad. I guess what I'm saying is that it hasn't been fully reviewed yet. And I don't know if it's going to be. There's something weird about this film where it seems like it's really flying under the radar, if you will. It's not even really a pun. I mean, he's basically a smuggler, so I guess that was a weird attempt at a joke. But it just doesn't feel like a very prominent film. Obviously it has Tom Cruise, who used to be, I think, one of the biggest movie stars in the world. He's certainly not an unknown now, or he's not like even B-list. It's just like the whole concept of A-list celebrities has changed so much over the last 10 to 20 years that him alone could open a film 10 years ago. And now that's just not the case. And The Mummy was a perfect example of that. I think a lot of people going into The Mummy thought, hey, we're going to take this old IP, this old Universal monster story that we've had forever. There's been so many different remakes of that film or that concept. And we're going to add Tom Cruise, and voila, we're going to make, $16 million opening weekend. That did not turn out to be the case. Mostly because I think the film was terrible. And I got a chance to see it about a couple months ago. The movie opens fine. And then it's just a complete another train wreck for the last 3/4 of the movie. Like basically unwatchable. I don't know how that happened. I don't know who was responsible for that train wreck, but it just wasn't, the quality was very poor, right? And I think that obviously destroyed the movie's chance at doing well over a long period of time. And I think in a lot of ways that Rotten Tomato score really hurt even opening weekend and people getting excited and hyped for the film. American Made seems like it's a lot better quality film. It's rated R. It's about 2 hours long. I believe it has already been released in a couple places. I have to check on this though. Yeah, it's already made about 60 million bucks worldwide. Let's see where it's doing pretty well. United Kingdom, it's doing well. Spain, and Australia. So it's made a little bit of money so far. Production budget was 80 million. That seems a little high for something like this. September also has been traditionally a dumping ground. When I first heard about this movie and saw the trailer, I was like, oh, this is just going to get dumped in September. It's not going to be a big deal. But I think it's going to be a little bit bigger deal than I thought it was going to be, just because the quality seems like it's very high. 88% with 78 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes is actually very good. On the want to see score, It's got about 12,000 people, or I'm sorry, 11,500 to be exact. Sort of people that want to see it. That's the little thing on Rotten Tomatoes to sort of measure hype. That's not terrible. If you compare it to the other wide opener this weekend, Flatliners, that's at 8,000. Has not been reviewed at all, but we'll get that one in a bit. So what are we thinking for this, right? It's let's check the number of screens. So it's on 3,000 screens. So it is a wide release, but it's certainly not a super wide release by any stretch of imagination. So that's going to hurt its opening numbers. It's not 4,000 screens, it's only 3,000. Usually with a wide release, something like this from, it's from Universal, it's from a big studio, I would expect at least 3,300 screens. I'm not sure why it's only coming out on 3,000. That suggests to me that Universal is a little bit hesitant about pushing it out more. Or, maybe the theaters are just packed with Kingsman and It playing and stuff like that. That's also a possibility. Let's start talking some numbers here. So Box Office Pro, it's pro.boxoffice.com, but I call it Box Office Pro because I guess that's its official title. They are, I don't really know much about them. I know that they seem like they're an official, almost like studio run organization. I don't know what their deal is. They run Box Office Magazine, so they're very much, I think, in bed with the industry. So I don't really take their numbers all that seriously, but it's a good starting place for a conversation. They also do long range forecasts. Like, we just came out with a forecast for Justice League. They're saying $150 million opening weekend, 330 domestically. Their long range forecasts tend to be kind of all over the place. Sometimes they're right on, but most of the time they're pretty far off. I have no comment on Justice League right now. It's in November. Let's just wait until we get closer to that before I start talking about the Thor and Justice League and the comic book bonanza that's going to happen later this year. So they say $16 million for American made for this weekend, with a total of 54. So, if you run that through the old trusty calculator, 16 million divided by, let's say, about 3,050 screens, you're looking at a $5,250 per theater average. That feels okay. I kind of wondered what Universal is expecting out of this. Variety says expected to land in the low to mid teens. So they're lower than Box Office Pro. That per theater average does seem a little bit high to me. One thing Box Office Pro doesn't seem to do very well is account for differences in screen or theater sizes. Like, if it's the difference between 3,500 screens and 3,000 is massive when it comes to the final box office, right? It's a really big deal. I feel like Variety probably has been talking to Universal and say, hey, what do you guys think this is going to do? And they're sort of using that as their guide here. So I feel like low to mid teens sounds about right. I would say, let's just base it on 3,023 screens. Let's just throw out, I want to say, like $3,900 per screen, or per theater, I should say. I always screw that up, per screen per theater. I wish there was a per screen average too, because that would be a different ballgame. So my number at $3,900 per theater puts us at about 11.8 million. That feels really right to me. That feels like, yep, that makes sense. Based on the number of screens, based on the fact that despite this film being of high quality, it seems kind of like a very tired idea. The marketing has been very all over the place. I've seen next to nothing about it besides when the trailer dropped. I've seen nothing on TV, nothing online. So I think there's a little bit of just, hey, let's throw this out in September and just kind of use Tom Cruise as our PR and see if we can turn in a profit that way and make this thing kind of fly for a bit. Because it has a good quality though, right? Because of that quality, I expect at least a 3x multiplier. So I would say definitely going to go past $35 million domestically. Now, if it breaks out, I just don't see it breaking out. Like I feel like I could bet $1 million it's not going to break out. It just seems so boring to me. And not that the film's bad or anything. It's just like the concept. It's like, look, we've already had a TV show on Netflix for the last 3 or 4 years that covers this topic to varying degrees of success. I didn't even get through the first season of Narcos. Like, could not stand the voiceover. It made me go nuts. I was like, writing 101. If you can't write something good, you use a voiceover. And that rule is very rarely is there an exception to that, right? Like voiceover is just, at the end of the day, mostly lazy writing or bad writing. And I couldn't get over that with Narcos. I was just like, so you're telling me how to feel all the time? Like, come on. But in any event, it's a very popular show. A lot of people loved it. So it's been in the zeitgeist for a while. And that's why this idea just seems very tired about this person being a pilot and trafficking drugs and going down there. It's like, nah, I kind of seen this stuff all before. So I'm going to stick with like a high 11s, maybe to 12 million bucks, and then probably passing over the mid 30s total domestically, maybe onto 40 because of the high quality. That's sort of my guess. I don't think it's going to do much lower than that. I don't think it's going to be much higher than that. It doesn't really feel like a total floppage or breakout's going to happen. It just seems kind of like a mediocre performance is going to happen here. So that's the biggest opener this weekend. The other one is Flatliners, duh. So Flatliners is, if you're younger, you probably don't remember this movie. Was a big movie. God, I want to say the late 80s. Now I feel like an idiot because I don't know what year it came out. I have to look it up. So the original movie was kind of like a weird, I don't want to call it a cult classic because it was supposed to be kind of like a bigger movie when it came out. It had Joel Schumacher was the director, Kiefer Sutherland, Julia Roberts, Kevin Bacon, William Baldwin, Oliver Platt. So kind of an all-star cast there. And it came out in 1990. I remember seeing it as like a little kid or maybe like a really young teenager. So it's always sort of been in my sort of head that this thing exists. But I think for younger people that may not remember the movie at all, just because it wasn't very big. And maybe it's a cult classic amongst people my age, but I think it's not like a wider cult classic that like, I wouldn't say it's someone who's like 25, like, hey man, you got to check out Flatliners. No one's going to say that. So I feel like a little bit of a niche there. We've already had the biggest horror film ever essentially get released this month. I think people have met their horror quota for a while. I think until probably the week or two before Halloween, and there's a lot of horror films coming out this year in October. This one just didn't feel like they were going all in on it. I don't know why. It just did not seem like they really even wanted to make this remake, if that makes any sense. It just seemed like they were being lazy with it. And I just don't think it has a chance in hell of doing well. I don't think there's any way it does well. The only person that sticks on the cast to me is Ellen Page, which I'm really surprised that she's doing. Kiefer Sutherland also shows up probably in like a cameo. Diego Luna, James Norton. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it was fully fleshed out, like the entire idea. The marketing was okay. It kind of looks like a beat for beat remake of the original. And the numbers aren't looking great for Flatliners. It's only opening on 2,200 screens. That's already a really bad sign. It's hardly a wide opening. It's Sony Screen Gems. That's kind of like their weird horror-ish. Usually horror films in print. Or anything sort of weird. They put it on there, or youth oriented sometimes they call it. Box Office Pro is saying $12 million. That doesn't really jive with me at all. See, this is why I don't like Box Office Pro, because that doesn't make any sense, right? At 2,000, their per theater average is going to be way too high, I think. So at 12 million at 2,200 screens, you're looking at a $5,400 per theater average on a movie that nobody knows is coming out, and that even the studio doesn't even want to market it really. Although I did see someone on Twitter just sort of live streaming, or they're like walking into the premiere or something. It's like, this is stupid. What a lazy attempt at marketing. I feel like 12,000 is going to be too high. Definitely too high. Variety is saying 7 to 8 million on the 2,200 screens. So let's say it's 7.5 million divided by 2,200 screens or theaters. You're looking at about $3,400. That, I don't know, like that seems definitely more in line with what I was thinking. The 12 million, I don't know where they're getting that from. That just seems kind of outrageous to me. There's nothing to me to indicate that it's going to do 5,000 per theater. Like, it just doesn't feel like, is it possible? 100%. It's a horror film. People like to go to horror films, but the problem now is that it feels like a lesser film. It looks like a lesser film. The studio's treating it like a lesser film. The marketing attempts that they've made on this are lesser. And so movie going isn't one of those things that people just do casually anymore. It's not like it was 15, 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, where it's like, oh, hey, let's just go to a movie. Oh, whatever's playing, Flatliners. People don't really do that anymore because it's so expensive. Like, if you're paying, $12, and then my local Cineplex, it's like $12 for like a matinee now. I was like, where is this? New York City? It's ridiculous. But it's more of a one-off event. People go out to see it as a group, with a group of people, because it's like the event to go do. Flatliners is not going to be an event for people. So I feel like even the 7 to 8 million feels a little bit high. I'm going to say like maybe a $2,700 per theater average, which would put it at about 6 million. So that's why I'm gonna guess about 6 million for that. I just don't see who's gonna go see this. I'm a big horror movie fan, and I have just about zero desire to see this. Although I have Movie Pass now, so I just go basically. It feels like it's for free. You pay $10 a month, but you go as often as you want, whenever you want. They're gonna lose so much money. I hope Movie Pass survives, but I get the feeling that may not. So it's basically for free for me to go see it, but like, it's like, do I want to drive 10 minutes, 15 minutes to the theater and like sit there for this sort of kind of, I know it's going to be a trashy, poorly written movie. And I think that's like, that thought process is being replicated a million times over in this country about this movie. And it's sort of like, who's going to go out and see it? You really kind of have to be super bored or super committed. And I just don't see a lot of people doing it. So I'm going to say about 5.9, 6 million bucks overall. Now, probably the bigger question this weekend is who's going to win out, right? I think American Made and Flatliners aren't really in contention. It's probably going to be between Kingsman and it, with, I think, so if you look at last weekend, which we had a little show about, but on the 22nd through the 24th, the actuals now, I'll talk about, because I just talked about the estimates on Sunday. The actuals for Kingsman was 39 million, which was, kind of exactly where they thought they estimated that it coming in at. But remember, it was much lower than what they were thinking Thursday with the Thursday previews and the Friday matinees. So before lunchtime, noon, we were talking, mid 40s, at least 40, mid 40s, maybe higher. And then something happened. So Friday didn't pan out the way they thought it was, and Saturday didn't do that well. And the Sunday drop was pretty much what they had anticipated based on those earlier numbers. So something happened there where it was front loaded, essentially. Now, I don't want to say like fanboys or anything like that, but there was definitely a rush for people to see this movie, a small group of people who love the first one. Maybe not a small group of people, millions of people. I guess it was millions of people. Well, whatever. Well, it had to be at least 1 million people, right? If it's making 39 million bucks, I'll give you, so the average ticket price in the United States is $9. So if I did $39 million, like, I have to prove to myself how many people went to go see this movie because I'm a weirdo. Divide by 9 million, or sorry, $9. And you're looking at about, of course, my like calculator explodes, about 4.3 million bucks. I'm sorry, 4.3 million people went to go see Kingsman. Average about 4 million probably. So look, a lot of people went to go see it, but they went to go see it earlier in the weekend, right? That's the point I'm trying to make in that sort of rambling mess. It did $29 million, almost 30, just about a 50% drop, which is great for that film. You know, it's definitely, it passed over into the sort of event meme, cultural moment type film where it's not dropping 60-70% like a normal, not even a normal horror film, but horror films kind of in general have a lot higher drops. It didn't have one of those drops. It didn't have a sort of front-loaded fanboy drop. I think that might happen with Kingsman. So let's run through a couple scenarios. So let's assume that it drops 50% on the weekend. So that means it'll come in at about 14.8 million for the weekend. So I guess that's why people were trying to figure out if American Made was going to win. If American Made overperforms, then yeah, it has a possibility of maybe getting up in the first place, but I just don't see it. I don't see that happening. I think it's more in the 11 to 12 range. So 14.8, 14.9 million if it drops about 50% again. And then Kingsman, what is Kingsman going to drop? Because I already talked about it dropped within its own opening weekend itself pretty rapidly. So that suggests a pretty steep drop, right? Like at 50% drop, it's going to do about 19.5, right? Let's say maybe at the extreme end, it does a 60% drop. You're looking at 15.6. I don't see a 60% drop. It is possible, just because it's a sequel. It definitely felt front loaded in its own opening weekend, but 60 is a pretty high drop for something like this. I think Kingsman's going to come in at number one. I think it's going to be Kingsman, American Made, and probably the Lego Ninjago movie coming in at number whatever that would be, 4 or 5, whatever. I think that's probably what's going to happen. I don't think Kingsman's going to drop over 60%. I just don't. That feels like it would be a big outlier to me. So I think Kingsman's going to have its second week at number one, which isn't really that surprising. Kind of not a hugely exciting weekend. There's a couple other movies coming out, actually. A Question of Faith, which is a Christian movie opening on, it's PG. Pure Flix is the distributor. I guess then that's a Christian distributor. Oh yeah, they did like God's Not Dead 2. They didn't do the first one. Very strange. Woodlawn, The Case for Christ, all that stuff. I won't say anything about it. I won't be mean. So that's going to be a minor player this weekend. It's only on like 600 screens, so it's not going to be a factor. Anything else happening with openers? Stronger is expanding out to 650 theaters. That had an okay opening weekend per theater average for a film that basically wasn't marketed at all. I don't know what happened on that movie. Like, I thought maybe the quality wasn't good enough. It's Jake Gyllenhaal, who I thought this last week's show, I was like, oh, is he like an Iraq war vet? He lost his legs. No. It's about the Boston bombing. I was totally wrong about that. An idiot. I would have thought there was gonna be maybe like Oscar talk about it. But no, I mean, it's just getting dropped here in September with basically no fanfare. It's gonna die at 650 theaters. It's gonna collapse. I mean, its opening weekend was not fantastic, and in its expansion, it's going to just be a lot. That sort of middling performance is going to be sort of just accented and amplified outward, and so I think it's going to do pretty poorly, and it will probably disappear from the theaters very rapidly. Battle of the Sexes is also expanding. This is the sort of historical fictional retelling of the tennis match, and we got Steve Carell's in it. It's Emma Stone. 1200 Theaters is expanding to. Had not a very good limited opening on 20 screens. I think it did like 25K. Not good. And so I don't know. There was a lot of Oscar talk about this one. It's got really good ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, 85% Rotten Tomato. I want to see the audience score though, because it's going to be. I guess I don't have the audience score up yet because it was only limited. Not a ton of buzz there. Only about 6,000 people on the wanna see score. It's that limited performance was just not good. Yeah, just about 25K per theater on 21 theaters. So it's not going to do well. Which I think is unfortunate because it looks like a really good movie. I thought the marketing was spot on. Fox Searchlight usually does a really good job marketing their smaller films. Maybe it's just not the type of movie people want to see right now. I don't know. I think it looks great. I'm probably actually going to see it now that I'm reminded that it is expanding wide. So that's mostly it for this weekend. So we're going to look at a repeat of Kingsman, I think, at number 1, and then American Made and Flatliners sort of heavy, not very good openings, with Flatliners probably sort of flopping. I don't think American Made's going to flop. I think Tom Cruise and the good quality of the film clearly will help it sort of keep it out of the single digit range. Flatliners, that's not going to be the case at all. It's on too few screens. It's almost like they're setting themselves up for failure with it. With not just on marketing stuff, but like opening it only on 2,200 screens. It's like, I don't know, like if you wanted to maximize the potential of that product, to me, it would make more sense to just say, screw it. Why release it in theaters at all? Maybe it's contractual obligations with the production companies or whatever. But it seems like I don't even know what you do with it. Like maybe put it on, what the hell is that horror film streaming service? I forgot what it's called, but it's a whole streaming service just for horror films. Put it on there, or maybe sell it to Netflix or Amazon, and they can promote it and all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense to put it out in the movie theater because I know it's not going to do well. And so that's probably going to flop, and American Made will do okay. And then the rest is kind of what we saw last weekend. Nothing too crazy happening this weekend. What else to talk about? So next weekend is going to be a fun one. Blade Runner is coming out. I'm going to see it probably opening night because I'm a huge Blade Runner fan. I have zero clue what that film is going to do. And I mean like none. Box Office Pro has it opening at 44. That seems super low to me. Not super low. It just feels... It doesn't feel right. Doesn't it feel right to say Blade Runner is going to open at $44 million with Ryan Gosling in the lead, with Denis, whatever the hell his name is, the director of Arrival and all that fun stuff. What else did he direct? Arrival and Sicario, I think. So an amazing director. It looks phenomenal. It's the sequel to like a huge, a film that did not do well when it was released. But has become like this cultural icon of sci-fi and noir and just film in general. It's like you ask any film nerd one of their favorite films, there's a good chance Blade Runner is going to be up high on that list. So there's only saying $44 million, but I feel like that's low. I feel like everybody's really underestimating this film. I've actually gotten into fights with people online. This is something I have to talk about just because I don't understand it, and I think it might be a generational or an age thing. But multiple times online, the tracking information has been posted and people talk about it. And people seem to be thinking that the term that has been used over and over again with Blade Runner, with this new one, is niche and obscure. And I just I don't know, like maybe 15 years ago, Blade Runner was niche and obscure. Like when I was growing up and a teenager and I knew about Blade Runner, I probably didn't actually know about Blade Runner until I was in my early 20s, like really knew about it and saw it. Probably saw it in like college. Yeah, back then, 15 years ago, it may have been kind of obscure and a little bit niche, but because of the internet, because of how even nerd culture has permeated out to the masses, essentially, you know, there is no more nerdy sort of alter film than Blade Runner. And so I'm thinking by just osmosis, like everybody knows what Blade Runner is, right? Like I feel like it's just completely changed in the last 15 years. And that's why they're remaking it, and, you know, let them spend $180 million to remake it, because there was this cultural knowledge and cultural respect for this film that was not very well received by the public when it came out. Obviously, critics and film scholars loved it pretty much from the start because it was such a fascinating and rich movie. But it took the masses like 30 years to really catch up to that. I don't know. I feel like 44 is too low. The movie is almost 3 hours long, so that's gonna be a problem. But hey, Titanic was 3 hours long, wasn't it? I feel like Titanic was like 4 hours long. And you know, this weekend's really quiet. American Made's gonna do okay. Flatliners is probably gonna flop. You have a couple holdovers that are gonna win the weekend. So people are gonna probably want something a little bit new next weekend. I don't know. I could be totally wrong. Maybe those people are right. Maybe Blade Runner is niche and obscure and it's not going to do great. I just don't see that at all. I don't see that viewpoint really at all. I think it's going to do well over $50 million. I think it's going to have a great run to well over 150 domestic, maybe even higher than that, which I think would be great for that movie. Also coming out next weekend is The Mountains Between Us, which I have an inkling might break out, but also just completely flop. I'm not really sure about that. That's mostly it for the rundown of what's coming out. There are a couple interesting articles that I wanted to mention. Variety had an article basically talking about how movie theaters are getting kind of nervous. It's funny. I'm reading top stories on Variety. Box office: Tom Cruise faces another flop. Oh man, it's ridiculous. So we'll see. I don't know if that's going to be. I don't think it's going to flop. I don't think American Made's going to flop. It's not going to do great, but it's not going to flop. So this article is basically talking about how movie theaters are getting kind of nervous. You know, all the movie theater owners, their stock has just plummeted this summer, mostly due to bad performance at the box office. I think AMC or somebody dropped 60% in value. That's basically crashing as a stock, right? So the whole article is basically sort of summarizing what's been going on with theaters and why they're nervous. And, you know, the big point they were trying to make, and I thought the interesting point was that people are just not going to movies anymore. Like there's no way you can change that large cultural sort of movement away from theaters. I believe the number of theater attendances peaked in 2002, and from then until now, we're off about 250 million. So about 250 million less admissions per year now. That's not going to change, right? Like there's nothing that's going to bring out more people to the theaters. I think the Star Wars phenomenon and that coming back has sort of maybe clouded the reality of what's happening, right? And I talked about this a lot when MoviePass decided to drop their price to $10. It really was kind of like, I don't want to say canary in the coal mine, but it seemed like a harbinger of something massive shifting in the industry. And I think theater owners are going through this sort of, it's like a mixture of denial and then also trying to kind of like plan for the doomsday scenario, right? So on the one hand, they are basically saying, oh, you know, everything's fine. It's just a really bad summer. You know, look at it. It did so well. And then we got Star Wars coming out. The Last Jedi's coming out. Like, that's going to be huge and massive. And so, like, the theater owners are kind of like, on one hand, everything's kind of fine. And then on the other hand, they're really worried about what the studios are going to do, because the studios have been playing around with this idea of releasing new films to kind of like a VOD service, priced really high, like 30 to 50 bucks per film. And I'm not sure of the exact window, but it might even be not the weekend it opens, but a couple of weekends after, allowing people to stream these movies in their home. When that first was announced, I was like, oh man, finally the industry like gets it. Like, people want to watch movies on their own time, in their own environment, just because movie theaters are really expensive, and they're kind of, it's like stressful being around other people, and like, what if someone uses their phone? There's just a lot of factors why people would prefer to just watch the film at their home with their family. But then I thought about it a little bit more when I was reading that over, and I was looking at the pricing that they threw out. And the moment they threw out $50 per film, I was like, it's like, on the one hand, I think you guys get it, and then the other hand, I think you guys are absolutely clueless. Like, one of the biggest reasons why people don't go to the movies anymore is the price, right? Like, I personally, I love going to the movies. It's one of my favorite things to do. Obviously, that's why I do this podcast. I probably went 3 to 4 times a year, tops. I mean, during the holidays, I probably went to like 5-6 movies at least, but the rest of the year it's pretty low, just because I don't want to pay $15 to go see a movie, and I like to do the whole experience. I like to get some sodas, popcorn, really do the whole thing. I can't even imagine what it would cost to take a family to go to. It would be like $100. I mean, why would you do that for a movie when you have Netflix, when you have HBO, when you have Amazon Prime? So I think that the theater owners are worried about that for them, because what that does is that breaks down the window. And they always talk about the window in the industry. The window is the time it takes for a movie to get released in the theater, the time it takes until the movie goes to VOD, and then streaming, and then home video or whatever. So there's different windows, but that main window is the moment when a consumer can get that movie, other than going to the theater, right? And for when I was growing up, the window was pretty long, right? Like, it would be like a big movie would come out, and it wouldn't come out on VHS or DVD or whatever for like a year. Like, the window was like 12 months. A little bit earlier, I think, on pay-per-view, but not much. Now that window has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, to the point where it's about, I want to say, 3 months before it's on VOD. And that's sort of like what they're getting used to now. With the new service that they're promoting, the studios are promoting, that window could drop to 2 weeks. And like, that completely changes how movie theaters function. And they're really nervous about it, and they probably should be, although maybe not so much, because with that pricing model that the studios are coming out with, and they're coming out with that model because they feel like that's what they need to charge to recoup their costs, which is the exact opposite way of how you run a business, right? You don't price a product on what it will take it for it to break even. You price a product on what people will pay for it. And if there's not an avenue to release a product in that way, that's going to break even, then you don't do it, right? Like, it's like, you're just basically cutting off your nose to spite your face then. Because if they do this, if they say release it 2 weeks after on VOD for $50, I don't know, man. I just don't think it's going to go very well. I think they're going to lose a lot of people going to the theaters, and I don't think they're going to make it up with people paying $50 to see it at their home. I just don't see that. So the article was a good kind of overview of what was happening. And the article ends with a theater owner basically saying, my grandfather was in this business for a long time. He used to say, everybody's got a kitchen, but people still go out to eat. And sort of that was the thought process, with kind of feeling safe that theaters aren't going anywhere. And, when I think about that a little bit, that to me seems almost like, it seems kind of an oddly conservative and maybe even naive viewpoint, but there is some truth there, right? Like, I can watch a lot of movies on VOD, in my home or Netflix, but I really prefer going to the theater, just because it's not my home. It's a dedicated place to see in the movie. Usually it's a very, great sound, great screen, or you go with a friend and then you can talk about the movie afterwards. It's just a very specific experience that I very much enjoy. And I think a ton of people do as well. So I don't think theaters are going away. I think the studio's solution with the weird 2-week VOD $50 option per film it just doesn't make any sense, and I think they're really selling themselves short. Movies are super popular, and I don't think they're ever going to go away, at least in my lifetime. And I think people love going to the theaters, so they need to find a solution at the theater level to make sure that they're able to keep making these bigger movies. And it's not like a lot of them the studios are hurting that much. The big issue that I have seen is that they're releasing shitty movies. And so there's actually a really good radio show today about Rotten Tomatoes and its effect on the industry. Check it out. It's on the St. Louis NPR station. I don't know what it is. Just Google that and Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm sure today's episode will come up. They had a good little roundtable talking about how the studio is blaming Rotten Tomatoes, and this has been a big sort of talking point or point of contention over the summer, with a lot of articles going back and forth on Variety, Hollywood Reporter, and then some other media outlets picking it up as well. The studio's fight against Rotten Tomatoes. It's just it's an absolutely absurd argument that makes zero sense. And the one that they point out is Baywatch. Baywatch got I have to look it up on Rotten Tomatoes, but probably 15%, terrible rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The studios blamed that score for the film doing so poorly. And, that doesn't make any sense, right? Or it's sort of like, if you're thinking on a philosophical level, right, which I love to do, is that you're blaming a review aggregator site for the movie that you spent millions upon millions of dollars making. You're blaming them for it being terrible, is essentially what they're saying. What they're trying to do is say, oh, no. What we're seeing is that Rotten Tomatoes is manipulating and perverting the audience's expectations for that film, and pushing them away, right? But in reality, critics aren't perfect. Rotten Tomatoes is not perfect in how they score films. I don't even really like it that much, to be honest with you, but it does get the general consensus right on films. Let's just look through a couple examples. It got an 85% Rotten Tomatoes, right? That seems pretty. I would have given it probably in 72%, but that's not what it's measuring. All it's measuring is take all the critics, which ones think it's better than 60% and which ones don't, and then they basically they sort of aggregate that. It's a very holistic, wide viewpoint, but it's pretty accurate from that high level. Kingsman Golden Circle got a 50% Rotten Tomatoes. Audience, how that relates to the audience is a little bit different, but it's sort of that's sort of the general consensus. It wasn't a really good film. And that's probably objectively true on some level. It's not a great sequel. It was boring. It was bloated. All you have to do is read the critics' sort of responses to the movie, and they seem fairly accurate. It's not like they're making stuff up. So Rotten Tomatoes does accurately capture the sort of wider critical view of a film, right? Baywatch, for example, was just panned, and rightly so. I watched it. One of the worst comedies I think I've seen in a long time. Poorly written. The actors are great in that film, but they have nothing to work with. Just one of the worst written mainstream comedies I've seen in just a very long time. Poor product. Critics picked up on that, and now movie studios are pissed off because they made a shitty movie, essentially. And so that's sort of the bigger picture here, is that the studios are trying to contend with a lot of things, and then you have the theater owners, which are trying to contend with a similar group of problems. From the studio's perspective, they're scared because, and I almost call this like it's sort of like the Amazon model, right? What sells well on Amazon? That one of the number one things that people look to on Amazon are the customer reviews. To me, that is the reason why that company has done what it has done. It's become basically one of the biggest companies in the world based on a super customer centric model. That was the model of that company from the start. They have basically not only changed so many different industries, they've changed the whole concept of business, right? And that happened over the last 20 years, where now we're in an economy. It's almost kind of like the service economy, but with products, right? Everything has to be 4 or 5 stars, right? Unless it's 4 or 5 stars, forget about it. I don't even want to look at it. And that's what Amazon has done. But with all of these different industries, it has bled out into, and now it is bleeding into the Hollywood film industry. And they're probably a little bit freaked out because 10, 15 years ago, they could make any movie they wanted at any quality, and they could get people to go and see it. Now, would it do well over time? Some degrees, less or no, but they essentially could just make whatever they wanted. It could be a 2-star movie, but earn a 5-star amount of revenue, which was bullshit, right? Which really angered a lot of people. And now the industry is finally getting a taste of what every other industry out there has had to face over the last 20 years, and that's the customer, right? If the customer isn't happy, then the product's not good, right? And it sounds so simple and almost cliche to this point, but especially for, I think, younger people, they don't understand this. That wasn't the case 20 years ago. 20 years ago, Hollywood could throw together a movie the last second, have a terrible script, and as long as you had somebody famous in it, people would go out and see it and make $20 million opening weekend. That's just the way it was. Now it's just not the same. It's just not the same at all. And the studios are terrified because the power has been taken out of their hands, right? Now they have to answer to customers they don't even like. And so it's a very different model, completely different model for them. So they're worried about and scared about customer ratings and sort of the customer experience they actually have to really think about now. Whereas they didn't have to do that, even as recent as a decade ago. It was totally different. Theater owners are sort of pissed off because of this closing window, right, where they're getting less and less time to run their movies, and the fact that the product that the studios are putting out, especially the major studios, has not been great. You had Transformers, you have Pirates, you have Baywatch, all these big, massive flops that should have made hundreds of millions of dollars, but just didn't. And the theater owners can't really choose what products they're showing. Like, they don't really have a choice. Like, the studios are going to make what they make. And sure, like, they have like a trade show and like, oh, hey, look at the movies that are coming out. The studios still sort of run that, though, right? It's not like AMC is going to be like, I'm not going to show it. Come on, that's not how it works. Studios have the power, and they're unfortunately putting out these poor products. And so it's a weird situation to be in, because the studios are essentially facing a war on 2 fronts. And it's both against the customer. The customer is no longer coming to see their movies on the basis that they were 15 years ago, right? So it's a shrinking market. It's a shrinking market that is also much more opinionated and discerning, right? So that's a really tough place to be in. Now you have less people coming in the store, and they're more picky about what they want, right? So the studios are just kind of like trying to figure out some solution to all this. And like, I don't have a ton of sympathy for them. They should have seen this coming 20, 30 years ago. Well, maybe not 30 years ago. Let's say 10 to 20 years ago, they should have started to prepare for this to happen, because it was happening in every other industry. It was happening, right? And they didn't think forward enough. They didn't have vision to look forward enough. And that's why they're losing that to TV. They're losing that to Netflix. They're losing that to these other mediums that provide narrative art of much higher quality. Like, if you look at TV, especially over the last 10 years, TV has far surpassed, I should say, the quality of films. It's mind-boggling how much great narrative art there is on television now compared to the movies. So it's funny, like they have a shrinking market, they have a more picky customers, and now they have this group of competitors they didn't have 15 years ago. So they're in a very, very tough spot, and that's why you see the stocks for AMC and Regal just totally crashing over the summer, because the analysts all look at this stuff and they all think about it in a much more cold and sterile way than a lot of other people look at it. To them, it's just about revenue, right? Is the revenue coming in? Is it growing? What's the growth rate? That's what they see. And it hasn't been looking good for a long time. And that's why those stocks collapsed, because, who wants to invest in a movie theater right now? Why would you? It doesn't make any sense. Like you'll be lucky if you don't lose your shirt in a couple of years, right? So that's essentially what's happening. And that was an article and what it was about. And so that's a little bit of an overview of it. So check it out. It's on Variety. Just look up, go to their movie section and it'll be there. There's another couple articles out today that I don't necessarily want to talk about. There was one on Hollywood Reporter that is worth checking out. Basically an overview of it and why it's super important. A rated R film, being so successful, talking about the issues that it's talking about. That's worth a read. The other sort of big news that came out today is that the Terminator sequel with James Cameron and Linda Hamilton is coming out. It's going to come out in 2019. So that was kind of a surprise. I didn't expect that one to happen. I had always thought the Terminator series was just gonna die. I did not ever think it was gonna come back. But to see that James Cameron's involved, he's sort of like, it's hard to figure out. There's a really good interview with him in Hollywood Reporter about his role in the new one. And he's gonna kind of help guide a group of writers on writing the script. He's not going to be that super involved because he's obviously filming 4 sequels to Avatar, which don't even get me started because I don't even know what that's going to be. Like 4 sequels to Avatar. Does anybody want a single sequel to Avatar? We talk about a film that did so well financially, but culturally has had zero impact on us. As somebody, how many times a week do people talk about Avatar? Like 0. How many times a year do they talk about it? Almost never. Like it had no cultural impact, just besides the finance and how well it did financially. So that's coming out in 2019. They're going to basically, it's Tim Miller from Deadpool is going to direct it. Cameron's going to kind of oversee it from a distance as he's doing the Avatar stuff. I have really high hopes for it just because, Linda Hamilton's involved, Arnold Schwarzenegger is involved. They're both coming back. So I feel like, and I trust Cameron with that series of films because he did create it. It was basically 100% him. And the first 2 films are absolutely brilliant. Well, brilliant, maybe it's strong. No, I think the second movie, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, has to be, top 5 action movies all time. It is just so good on so many different levels. So I trust him with the series. And that was big news that came out today. And I think that, that's mostly it. I don't want to go on too long. I want to go start like 50 minutes. In any event, I'm going to be back on Sunday, probably put it out Sunday afternoon based on the estimates. We'll talk about what happened this weekend. I'm thinking Kingsman's going to be number 1 again. I think it's going to squeak it out with probably 16, 17 million bucks or something like that. In any event, thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast.